It always begins with two families, not two hearts. A table between them, gifts laid out, words exchanged, promises made. Not for love, but for survival. In this moment, a life is decided, a future sealed, and a tradition older than memory itself continues. They call it marriage. But it was never just that. It was duty. It was strategy. It was survival. And for thousands of years, it was never a choice. Long before love was ever considered part of marriage, the world moved to a different rhythm, one where family honor, social power, and economic security meant everything. In ancient civilizations, marriage wasn't about affection. It was a transaction, a contract written not in emotion, but in obligation. In the earliest recorded societies, Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, a wedding was an alliance, a business deal, a bond between households. Love was unpredictable. Alliances were not. In ancient Mesopotamia, clay tablets recorded the terms of marriages like trade agreements. Dowries were negotiated, witnesses signed, and contracts sealed. A bride was not simply a partner, she was part of a family's wealth. In Egypt, marriage contracts listed the exact payments and inheritance rights for both sides. The words love or choice never appeared once. Even in the shadows of the pyramids, where gods were carved in stone, human relationships were still bound by law and property. In China, the idea of arranged marriage was guided by Confucian order. Harmony in the family was believed to mirror harmony in the empire. Parents sought partners for their children based on status, astrology, and the balance of yin and yang. Never passion. Love, they said, was dangerous. It created chaos. Marriage, in their eyes, was meant to preserve order. So matchmakers became as powerful as priests. They carried scrolls of birth dates, family histories, and fortunes. Two names aligned not by hearts, but by stars, and by social standing. In ancient India, the roots of arranged marriage ran deep into the soil of caste, religion, and dharma. A man's honor and a woman's purity were family treasures. Marriage wasn't just a union between two people, it was a binding of bloodlines, a ritual duty that shaped social order. Marriage lovers, when they happened, were whispered about in poems and punished in life. Texts like the Manuscripti described the woman as her father's property before marriage, her husband's after it. A bride's choice was rarely asked for, because the family's future weighed heavier than her will. In Greece and Rome, marriage served politics as much as passion. A senator's daughter could be exchanged for a general's favor. A merchant's son could marry a noblewoman to buy a name. Even in the birthplace of democracy, women had no say. They were married young, sometimes before puberty, their hands offered in exchange for alliances that shaped the ancient world. To be born a daughter in those times was to live with a destiny already decided. Your birthright wasn't freedom, it was expectation. From the day a girl first learned to walk, her family's eyes turned towards her future husband. His name, his wealth, his influence. Every smile was weighed, every gesture rehearsed, every moment preparing her for a wedding she did not choose. Love, when it existed, lived in secret places, in letters hidden, in songs sung behind closed doors, but in public, love had no place. Marriages were arranged by elders who believed they knew better, and perhaps in a world ruled by survival, they did. In medieval Europe, the church sanctified marriage as a holy union, but even holiness had rules. Marriages among the rich were negotiated by fathers and kings. Queens were sent to foreign lands to secure peace. Knights married heiresses to gain castles. Even peasants, when they married, often did so under the watchful eyes of their families who valued a good dowry over affection. The idea that love should precede marriage was almost laughable. Courtly love, that romantic ideal sung by poets, existed precisely because real marriage did not allow it. Men could worship women in verse, but not marry them for love. Love was for songs. Marriage was for life. In the Islamic world, the Quran brought structure and rights to marriage, but the arrangement itself remained a family matter. Contracts, witnesses, consent, all were required, but the choice still lay with fathers and guardians. Women could, in theory, reject a match. In practice, few dared. Honor, once stained, could not be restored. And honor, in many homes, mattered more than happiness. Centuries passed, but the system endured. From the rice fields of Asia to the courts of Europe, arranged marriage became more than a custom. It became a foundation of society. It decided property, power, lineage, and peace. To question it was to question the world itself. But in every age, there were those who did. Whispers of rebellion, a prince who fell in love with a servant, a girl who ran away to marry a poet, stories that defied order and were buried by history. But those small acts of defiance carried within them a spark that one day would ignite something greater. As centuries turned, the world began to change. Empires rose and fell, wars redrew borders, and slowly the meaning of marriage began to shift. By the Renaissance, love had found its voice again, not in reality, but in art. Painters, writers, and philosophers began to ask, what if marriage was not about duty, but about desire? But even then, tradition held its ground. In the 1600s and 1700s, among the European elite, marriages were still arranged like treaties. A woman's dowry could buy land, titles, or influence. A poor man could rise through marriage. A rich woman could lose everything. It was a chessboard, and every move was planned by others. Meanwhile, in Asia, arranged marriage was so deeply woven into culture that questioning it was seen as betrayal. Parents believed they were acting out of love, choosing stability over uncertainty, honor over emotion. In China, the practice of matchmaking became a respected profession. In India, entire families depended on astrologers to determine compatibility, matching horoscopes before souls. In Japan, the samurai class married for alliance, sealing power with ceremony and duty. Marriage became less about two people and more about preserving the structure of society itself. The idea that individuals could choose, especially women, was radical. For thousands of years, marriage was not freedom. It was the opposite of it. But deep beneath the weight of custom and control, something quiet was stirring. A new idea, small at first, almost invisible. That marriage could be about love. That love could be sacred, too. The idea of love as a foundation for marriage began as a whisper. And like all dangerous ideas, it spread quietly at first. During the Enlightenment, philosophers began to question everything. Kings, gods, and even the invisible rules that governed family life. If all men were born free, they asked, why should a woman's fate be decided before she even learned what freedom was? Love, they said, was not weakness. It was the purest form of human will, a choice. For the first time in recorded history, marriage began to move from the hands of parents into the hearts of individuals. In the 18th century Europe, novels and plays romanticized love that defied family and class. Characters like Romeo and Juliet were not just tragic lovers, they were rebels against the old order. Their story was a warning, but also a promise, that love could be powerful enough to challenge centuries of tradition. But revolutions of the heart often move slower than revolutions of the sword. Even as ideas changed, customs did not. Across Asia, Africa, and much of Europe, arranged marriage remained the backbone of social life. To question it was to invite disgrace. A daughter who refused could be disowned. A son who fell in love outside his caste or class could bring ruin to his name.
When the British Empire spread across continents, it carried not just armies, but also its own ideas of morality and marriage. Missionaries spoke of Christian unions and free will, while at home their own daughters still married for property and politics. In India, colonial rule clashed with deep-rooted customs. British reformers condemned child marriage, while Indian reformers began to speak of consent and education. But for most girls, little changed. They were still married before they could read their own names. Their childhoods ended under the sound of wedding drums. In Japan, modernization brought new pressures. The Meiji era promised progress, but in households across the country, the system of miai, arranged meetings, continued. Marriages were brokered by families and go-betweens who valued reputation over romance. Even love itself was seen as a distraction from duty. And yet, quietly, the world kept changing. By the early 20th century, industrialization pulled young men and women away from their villages and into cities. There, in crowded streets and factories, they met people outside their family's control. Choice, once unthinkable, became possible. Some fell in love, some rebelled, but most still returned home to marriages arranged by parents who feared what freedom might bring. For women especially, marriage remained both a prison and a protection. In societies where they could not work freely or own property, a husband was not just a partner, he was survival itself. To remain unmarried was to be unanchored, unprotected, unwanted. And so even when love arrived, it often came too late. Then came war, the great destroyer and the great changer. World War I and then II tore apart empires, traditions, and certainties. Men left home. Women took their places in factories, hospitals, and fields. When the wars ended, the world looked different. Women had seen life beyond the walls of their homes. They had earned wages, made choices, and tasted a kind of independence that no arranged marriage could erase. Still, for millions, the old ways persisted. In South Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, arranged marriages continued as a symbol of cultural identity and stability. Parents believed they were protecting their children from the chaos of modern love, from heartbreak, from divorce, from loneliness. They arranged marriages the way their ancestors had, believing that wisdom could guide happiness better than impulse ever could. But something deeper was shifting. By the 1950s and 60s, globalization began to connect worlds that had once been distant. Cinema, radio, and literature carried stories of romance, of lovers choosing each other despite the odds. The idea of marrying for love began to shimmer like a dream, not just a Western fantasy, but a universal desire. In small villages and big cities alike, young people began to question, what if love could come first? What if marriage could be a choice, not an arrangement? And slowly, cracks appeared in the wall of tradition. In India, love marriages, once whispered with shame, started to appear in newspapers. In Japan and Korea, arranged meetings became more like introductions, giving people a chance to choose. In the West, the very notion of marriage began to evolve into partnership, not property. But freedom brought its own burdens. Love, once forbidden, now came with expectation. When you could choose, you could also fail. And failure in love brought a different kind of heartbreak, the kind that could not be blamed on anyone else. For centuries, arranged marriage had guaranteed stability, if not happiness. Now, love marriages promised happiness, but not always stability. And in between these two worlds, billions of people still searched for balance, between family duty and personal desire, between tradition and change. As the decades turned, the numbers began to tell a story. In the 1970s, most marriages across Asia were still arranged. By the 2000s, that number began to drop, slowly, unevenly, but surely. In India, surveys showed nearly half of urban couples now chose their own partners. In Japan, arranged introductions declined as dating culture took root. And in the West, marriages themselves began to decline. Not arranged, not forced, sometimes not even wanted. History, it seems, had come full circle. For thousands of years, marriage had been about duty. Then it became about love. And now, in some places, it has become about choice, or the choice not to marry at all. But even as the world modernized, echoes of the old ways remain. In rural communities across Africa and South Asia, arranged marriages and even forced ones still happen. Sometimes they are disguised as tradition, sometimes as necessity. A girl is married off to settle a debt. A boy is married early to keep family honor. The reasons have changed, but the pattern has not. In those moments, the past still breathes. The same fears, the same hopes, the same bargains. And yet with each generation, more voices rise to question them. Women speaking for themselves, men refusing to follow old maps of control, parents learning that love too can be an act of tradition, the tradition of letting go. To look back at the history of arranged marriage is to look back at humanity's long struggle between control and freedom. We built systems to survive, and those systems for a time worked. They kept families stable, societies organized, empires strong. But in doing so, they silenced the one thing that makes us human, choice. And yet, perhaps it's too easy to simply call arranged marriage wrong, because for many it wasn't cruelty, it was care. It was the belief that wisdom should guide the young, that families knew best, that love could grow with time instead of striking like lightning. And sometimes it did. There were marriages born of arrangement that blossomed into tenderness. Two strangers learning to love because they had no other choice, and finding somehow that love could be learned. That is the complexity of history. No single truth, only many faces of the same longing, to belong, to be safe, to be loved. Today the world stands between the ruins of its past and the possibilities of its future. Dating apps have replaced matchmakers. Algorithms decide what took elders a lifetime to perfect. A screen can introduce two people who would never have met across oceans and cultures. And yet the questions remain the same. Who decides our destiny? Us or the world that shaped us? How much of love is choice and how much is inheritance? Because even now, when we think we are free, we still hear the echoes of the old voices. What will people say? Is he from a good family? Will she fit into our world?
The language changes, but the fear remains. We are still balancing love against duty, desire against expectation, self against society. Maybe that's what marriage has always been. Not a war between old and new, but a conversation that never ends. And as that conversation continues, one truth becomes clear. History does not vanish. It evolves. The arranged marriages of our ancestors were not just about control. They were about survival in a fragile world. Our love marriages today are about expression, freedom, and choice in a world that allows them. Both are mirrors of their time. Both tell us who we were and who we are becoming. So the next time you see two people standing before each other, exchanging vows, whether chosen by themselves or arranged by others, remember this. Every wedding is a story thousands of years old. A story written by kings and peasants, by parents and poets, by those who obeyed and those who defied. It's the story of humanity learning, over and over again, that love is not born from control, but from understanding. Because in the end, marriage, arranged or not, is not about who chose whom. It's about what we do with the choice once it's made. In a quiet village that no longer appears on modern maps, there once lived a girl named Mei Lin. Her story could have been told 100 different ways, in India, in Japan, in the Middle East, because it was in truth everyone's story. She was 17 when her marriage was arranged. The groom's family was wealthier, older, respected. Her parents, tired from years of drought and debt, called it a blessing. And in a way, it was. It meant one less mouth to feed, one more bond between families. The wedding came quickly. Red silk, music, incense. Her hands trembled under the weight of jewelry that did not belong to her yet. She smiled because her mother told her to, and when the drums began, she crossed the threshold of her childhood home for the last time. The man she married was not unkind. He was simply distant, a stranger bound to her by custom, not by choice. For months they lived like two shadows in the same room. She spoke little. He listened even less. Their lives moved with the rhythm of routine, like two gears that turned but never touched. Outside, the world was changing. The year was 1948. Empires had fallen. New nations were being born. Men spoke of freedom, independence, democracy. But in small homes like theirs, the revolution of hearts had not yet arrived. Mei Lin often sat by the window, watching the dust rise from the road that led to the city. Sometimes she wondered if the women there were free, if they chose whom to marry, or if choice was just another word for luck. Her husband, a merchant, left often, and in his absences, she learned to read from an old newspaper that wrapped their groceries. The words spoke of schools for girls, of women working in offices, of votes, of voices. For the first time, she wondered if her life could be more than endurance. When her daughter was born, she named her Hana, flower that grows even in winter. It was a small act of rebellion, though no one saw it that way. Hana grew up in a new world, one where radios sang of love and movies showed women who chose their own destinies. When Hana turned 18, a proposal came from a good family, well-mannered, traditional. It was everything Mei Lin's parents once wanted for her. But when the family came to visit, Hana refused to come out. She locked herself in her room, crying, saying she wanted to finish school, to work, to see the world first. The relatives were horrified. The neighbors whispered. And Mei Lin, the girl who had never said no in her life, said something she had never said before. She will marry when she is ready. It was a single sentence, a small sound in a large silence, but it carried the weight of centuries. Years later, Hana would fall in love on her own, not the kind of love from songs or stories, but the quiet kind that grows between equals. When she brought the man home, Mei Lin watched them speak, laugh, disagree, all things she had never dared to do. And for the first time, she saw what marriage could look like when it was born from choice, not arrangement. Time, like history, moves in circles. Hana had a daughter too. She called her Lian. And by the time Lian was born, the world had changed beyond recognition. Marriages were chosen, not dictated. Families asked for consent before commitment. And love, once a luxury, became an expectation. But freedom, too, carried its own storms. Lian's love story was not simple. It began with choice and ended with heartbreak. She learned that freedom does not always lead to happiness, and that love can wound as deeply as it can heal. When she cried to her grandmother, Mei Lin, old and fading now, only smiled. She said, "Even sorrow is a kind of freedom. When I was your age, I did not even know what my heart sounded like." 3 generations, one bound by duty, one born of defiance, one raised on dreams. Their lives formed a quiet lineage of change, an invisible revolution carried not by kings or wars, but by women who whispered no in a world that demanded yes. Somewhere between obedience and freedom, humanity had found its truest voice, not in defiance, but in evolution. Because the story of arranged marriage is not a story of cruelty or love alone. It is the story of how people learned to reshape both. And perhaps that's what makes this history so human, the way it refuses to be one thing. In every generation, there were those who accepted and those who rebelled, those who believed marriage was destiny and those who believed it could be choice. Each left their mark. Each built a bridge across time. Today, when two people stand before each other, promising to share a life, they are not just two souls beginning a journey. They are the sum of every ancestor who arranged, every lover who rebelled, every parent who learned to let go. Their vows carry the echoes of those who never had a choice, and the hope of those who finally do. And when the music plays, when hands are joined, when eyes meet, the world witnesses something both ancient and new. A union not of families or empires, but of hearts that have finally learned to choose. Because history may have begun with arrangement, but it continues and endures through love.